That's great. Okay, well, I'm going to suggest that we get underway, if that's okay with everybody. So, by way of introduction, although I've spoken to either online or in person, unusually, a lot of you, it's great to see you again, and it's great to see some new names and new faces as well. So just if you could I'll just repeat the protocol for the session. If you can keep your microphone switched off, that's probably best for everybody concerned. And keep your cameras switched on if you don't mind. But if you've got bandwidth problems or you'd prefer to be in the background, that's fine. As far as the presenters go, personally, I think it's nice to see faces and get some feedback, even if it's people nodding off, but hopefully that's not going to happen today. So so I'm Peter Russell. I'm the Innovation Advisor from Oxlep Business. And this is the latest in a series of innovation briefings, which we've been bringing to the SME community in Oxfordshire over the last year or so. And I'm particularly pleased to be involved in this one because we're involving contributions very much from outside parties today, and in particular, of course, DASA. So I'm going to let my colleague from DASA, Peter, another Peter, introduce himself and his colleagues in a few moments, rather than me sort of try and do that on their behalf. The format for today is we won't have breakout sessions like we have done in some of the previous sessions, but what we will be doing is trying to leave plenty of time for questions. So there's two ways that you can pop a question. You can use the chat box, which I think Teams calls conversation actually. So use the conversation facility. There's a little icon to help you do that, and pop in there any questions or comments that come up. Or you can try waving your hand, which is one of the thumbs up or wave hand symbols that you get with Teams, and I'll keep an eye out for those. Or even more potentially interesting, then please, you can try unmuting yourself when I'm inviting questions, and just see if you're the one that we get to first. And I really would like the session to be interactive, so please don't hold back on doing that. Just before I hand over to or say a couple of words about what today is about, I just wanted to remind everybody that this is just one of a number of things which Oxlep Business try and bring to you. There's a range of services and products to help support business development and growth that's available not only through the innovation programme, but through the hub activities which Oxlep Business offer. And at the moment, we're heavily promoting our peer group initiative, which has proven very powerful in helping business owners get together and kind of solve their own problems, really. So if you're interested in any of those other activities, I'd signpost you to the Oxlep Business website, or indeed you have my contact details at the end of this session, and just drop us a line with what you'd like to find out more about or what your needs are. So as I said, this is the latest in a series of innovation briefings, the purpose of which is to let you know about the resources available to you, including funding, but not only just funding, for innovation activities within Oxfordshire and the wider community. The second purpose is to try and bring people together as part of another community. And with that in mind, we are going to try a physical get together later on in the year, which we call a marketplace event, where you'll be able to meet some other innovators, some other technology developers, hopefully develop some collaborations and find out more what's available from the support community. So look out for that. And the best way to do that is to sign up for the Oxlep Business newsletter, and a link to do that is actually on our website. So I think that's enough about Oxlep Business. I'll talk a little bit later on about the support available for innovation more generally, and you can refer back to sessions that I've delivered previously, which are all on YouTube. Unfortunately, I'm not earning huge royalties from that yet, but if you carry on looking, then maybe they'll start rolling in. Today's session, slightly different, external presenters, very welcome to be doing that. And I think we need to get our thinking and creativity hats on today, because a lot of people don't think about that they are in the defence and security business. Therefore, why talk to an organisation like DASA or the MOD, Kinetic, or one of the other organisations that operate in that space? And one of the reasons is because these organisations, or the country as a whole, has a lot of challenges that it's trying to address. Some of them through organisations like the MOD, or indeed the police or the ambulance service, or we're all worried about cyber security, for example, and I'm sure that will come up today. So that's why there quite often is opportunities for you in these markets where either you're currently addressing them, in which so great, let us know your experience, or you may not have thought about it as an opportunity, which is why we're bringing you this session today. So we'll have 2 or 3 presenters, DASA, MOD, and we've also got Oxford Dynamics contributing today to tell us about their experience of working in this environment. Questions I'll invite if we've got time at the end of each session, each short presentation, just a few perhaps questions of clarification, and hopefully we'll have time for a bigger discussion at the end of the session. We will close the meeting by 12:30. If you have to leave beforehand, that's fine. If we run out of steam and we've covered most of the questions, then we may be able to finish a little bit early. That's up to you. Just to let you know, we are recording this, so it will be edited before it gets published. But if you'd rather not feature in that for whatever reason, then just make sure you switch your camera off or let us know. And I think that's about it. I'm going to hand over now, if I might, to Peter Wilkins from DASA. I will stop sharing my screen, which is the holding slide about why we're here, and invite Peter to take over. And yeah, I look forward to the discussion that we'll be hopefully having with everybody later on.
Brilliant, thanks, Peter, and yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you and the rest of the attendees. And thanks to Jordan as well for setting all this up and working out the technology for us. I'm now going to try and share my screen, so bear with me a second. Hopefully that's visible. Good. So yeah, as Peter was saying, Oxfordshire is one of the really key area for us within DASA. And there's a couple of real innovation hubs for us within the region. Obviously, we've got the University of Oxford, who are very active in terms of spinning out technologies across a whole range of areas, and a lot of those have come through DASA and have been successful. We've got the park at Harwell, where DASA have an office. I visit there fairly regularly, so if you're based there and you want to meet up for a coffee in real 3-dimensional life, then please do get in touch. And then in the far reaches of the region, we've obviously got the Defence Academy at Shrivenham, and Cranfield University have a lot of research going on there, and a lot of that will be relevant for defence. But I guess just to reinforce what Peter has already said, we're very keen to engage with suppliers who maybe don't see themselves as defence or security suppliers. And not only those on the call today, but you may have friends and contacts who equally may be relevant for us. And so just a quick plug from me, if you can pass on my details and DASA's details to anyone you can think of that might be relevant, then I'd be very grateful for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spend 10-15 minutes giving you a quick overview of DASA. I'm then going to hand over to my colleague Hannah, who's going to talk more about a fairly recent new initiative that we've started to run, our innovation loan service, Hannah is the expert on that, so I'm not going to try and cover that, but she'll cover that when I've finished. And then, yeah, we've got one of our suppliers who I'm very grateful has agreed to join the call and talk about their experience of working with DASA and what it's been like from their side. So yes, I'm DASA's innovation partner for the Southeast, so that includes Oxfordshire, and my job really is to engage with suppliers to try and reach out to new suppliers and to make sure that suppliers are making the most of the opportunities that we offer. So this is our mission, and it's worth just pulling out a few key words from that statement. So we're obviously all focused on innovation, so we're trying to develop and progress new technologies, and another key word there is exploitable. So we're not doing innovation for innovation's sake just because it's interesting, but our key mission is to make sure that we're doing stuff that has a real impact at the end of the process, and that impact is across UK defence and security. So as the picture suggests, we work closely with our armed forces across the whole of MOD, but we also work quite extensively with other parts of government, and that would include policing, the Home Office, Department for Transport, and potentially the security services. That's our main mission, and we have a secondary objective, which you can see at the end of that statement, which is around UK prosperity. So trying to make sure that innovations in the UK are taken full advantage of and feed through into ultimate capability. How do we do that? Well, this is a very simplified diagram that tries to explain how we work. At the top of the slide, we've got what we describe as customers. So they can sit within the Ministry of Defence across DSTL, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, as well as wider government, and I've already talked about some of those. They come with problems. They also come with money. At the bottom of the slide, we have the supply base, which is broadly split into small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. We work quite heavily with universities, and we also work with the larger suppliers as well. They have innovative solutions to those problems, and then we sit in the middle, feeding those problems to the supply base and pushing those solutions back in to our customers. So that means we have a very broad scope, because we work across defence and with wider government. We're interested in a wide range of sciences, technologies. That could be anything from fairly fundamental physics, chemistry, biology, engineering, all the way up through social sciences. We have a big interest in training, and really there's not much that we are potentially not interested in, as long as it has that defence or security impact at the end of the programme. We work across a range of maturity levels. So I said we work with universities. Obviously, that tends to be at the lower maturity end of the scale, but we operate across the spectrum all the way up to situations where we're demonstrating a prototype to potential end users. We get those ideas from anywhere. As I said on the previous slide, it could be a large supplier, it could be an existing defence supplier, it could be an SME, it could be a man in a shed. And we try to make sure that we are making the most of those ideas wherever they come from. And then there are a range of exploitation pathways for those innovations, and we work across that whole range. Let me just make sure I haven't skipped a slide. No, I haven't. So defence innovation is a fairly complicated thing, and there are quite a large number of organisations that are involved in this space, which you can see on this slide here. So all four of the frontline commands, so we've got Air Command, Land Command, Navy Command, and Strategic Command, have all spun up some kind of innovation-focused section within their organisations. Then you can see on the bottom left of the slide, we've got DSTL. We work very closely with them, although we have a separate reporting line and a separate funding line. And I guess the key takeaway from this slide is that we have good relationships with the organisations that are listed here. And that means that we can act as something of a front door into MOD and wider government. So if someone does come to us with an idea that doesn't quite fit with us, we are in a good place to at least point them in the right direction and start to make those connections. And we try and do that, and obviously sometimes more successfully than others. And obviously, as the comment says on the left of the slide there, this is really just the internal to MOD ecosystem. And we are very conscious that the real valuable innovation is going on out there in the supply base, including some of you who are listening in now. And as I said earlier, a big part of my role is to make sure that that connection is made and that those ideas are not sitting there unused, essentially. Next slide, here we go. So a few of the characteristics of the way that we try to work with industry. So as I said, we work across defence and security. We're interested in drawing in ideas from across the whole spectrum of organisations. We are constantly open to those ideas, and I'll talk a little bit more about our open core in a few minutes. We work across government. We don't require any match funding contribution from these suppliers that we fund. So if we fund a proposal, we fund the whole cost of the proposal. Our terms and conditions are fairly clear and simple and easy to understand, we hope, as far as is possible. We don't take ownership of any of your intellectual property. That stays with you. We don't take any equity. We contract as quickly as we can, subject to the commercial rules that MOD puts on us. And we try and make those connections between suppliers and the end users as close as possible. So what we try and avoid is a situation where a supplier throws in a proposal and we say no thank you, and then they throw in another one and we say no thank you. What we'd really like is if we could get to a point where we're discussing those proposals before they come in, so that hopefully when they do come in, they have the best chance of being funded. And we do a range of other stuff to try and exploit the projects that we fund and build the network between government, our end users, and the innovators out there in the supply base. So we were stood up in December 2016, and this slide just summarizes what we've been up to since then. And you can see from that chart on the left-hand side of the slide, we've assessed almost, well, over 4,000 proposals now, of which a big chunk have come from SMEs. That's not because we deliberately discriminate in favor of SMEs. I think it's largely because the size of the projects that we fund make it more attractive for SMEs who can move quicker and aren't perhaps bound by the same levels of process as some of the large suppliers. And I'll talk more about the size of the projects that we fund in a couple of slides. A big key metric for us is that 40% down the bottom of the slide. So 40% of the proposals that we're receiving are coming from suppliers that we've not worked with before, and continuing to build our network is a key way to maintain that freshness of the ideas that we're receiving. The next slide talks a little bit more about what we fund and how we fund. You can see that we funded almost 1,000 of those 4,000 roughly projects, which obviously translates into an overall success rate of around 1 in 4. That varies slightly depending on the kind of competition or call that we're talking about. And again, I'll discuss that on the next slide. But our open call, for example, overall a success rate of just under 1 in 5. And you can see the rough sizes of the projects that we fund. There's in the middle of that slide, 112K for a phase 1, slightly larger for a phase 2, with a total estimated funding for this financial year of around 60 million. So this slide is fairly busy, but it's worth walking through it. So essentially, it's a flowchart that is intended to guide a supplier as to which route might be most appropriate for them. As it says at the top, it doesn't discuss the defence innovation loans that Hannah will talk about in a moment. And I guess the first decision is, are you proposing something which aligns with one of the challenges that we've identified on our website? So we fund things broadly in 2 ways. We launch themed competitions where there's a specific need that we're trying to fill. And as it says under the second box along there at the bottom, they tend to have a clearly defined challenge, clearly defined budget, typically an 6 to 8 week window for submissions, and they're very much intended for us to go out there with a problem and say, right, who's got a solution to this problem then? Market explorations, which you can see right on the left at the bottom there, are often a precursor to a themed call. So we might get someone come to us and say, I need some innovation in this area. I'm not really sure what the state of the market is. I'd like to just understand what's going on out there before I decide whether to launch a themed competition. So they often are a precursor to a themed call, not always, but often. So that's where we're going out there with a requirement that we're looking to fill. The other side of the slide in the purple box relates to our open call, which really works the other way. So it's an opportunity for suppliers to come to us and say, I've got this. I think it might be helpful in this area, and I'd like some funding to help me develop it. And you can see that the open call runs in 2 streams. So we have emerging innovation, which is lower maturity innovations, tend to be fairly short projects and fairly low in value. Although, as it says, that 50 to 100K is not a limit, but it's a guideline for suppliers. And then rapid impact is at the other end of the maturity spectrum. So projects that are ending with some kind of demonstration, potentially a 2-year project, perhaps up to 350K, again, not a hard limit. And I guess the key thing, as it says there, is that when you get up to that kind of maturity level, we're looking for evidence that there's someone somewhere who is willing to put their hand up and say, this will be useful for me because it will enable me to do this, which I can't currently do, or it will enable me to do this better. So themed calls, going back to those, this is a kind of timeline, again, a rough outline. We try and work reasonably quickly. So everything you can see, consideration and refinement, is us working with our customers to understand what their requirement is. We launch the competition. We have usually an 8-week window for suppliers to submit their proposals. And then we go through those and assess them and make decisions about which ones we're going to fund. And that 4 weeks, again, is an ambition. We try and work as quickly as we can to make sure that suppliers aren't waiting around with some uncertainty as to whether they're going to be ending up doing the work or not. We only have one themed call open right now, which is called our Space to Innovate campaign. This is one of a series of challenges that we're putting out there fairly regularly. And you can see the 2 areas of focus there. Closing date for that, 9th of November. And there's obviously a lot more information on our website in terms of what we're looking for that specific challenge. Also worth giving a quick overview of some of the previous challenges that we've run. And you can see there's quite a variety of stuff there, all the way through from airport security, so detecting explosives hidden in electrical items, through robotics and autonomous systems, right down to chemical and biological munitions and how you deal with those. And it's worth pointing out that all the details for these previous competitions are still on our website. So if you have something that fits into one of these, it's probably worth having a chat around whether that requirement still endures, because there may be scope for a proposal to address that requirement. Finally, we have a network of innovation partners, of which I'm one, covering the whole of the UK, and we have an international colleague as well. So this is just a plea that if you've got questions, or if you're not sure about whether your idea fits with DASA, contact me. My contact details are on the next slide, or you can go through our website as it says there, and you'll be automatically directed to the appropriate partner for your region, which, if you're in Oxfordshire, will be me. My contact details as promised, so my email address there and my phone number. Don't hesitate, as I say, to get in touch if you've got questions. Alternatively, I'm happy to take any questions now. Don't know whether we want to do that before Hannah speaks or whether we want to wait till after Hannah's. It probably makes more sense to wait till Hannah's said what she has to say.
We do have one hand up though, so I don't know if you want to. Yeah,
I think you're right, Hannah. If Peter doesn't mind, Henry's taken the trouble to put his hand up, and I said we'd like to make it interactive, so let's do that.
Hi, Henry.
Can you hear me? Very quick question. You said at the end of the open call program, TRL level 7 or so, you'd want to see that there was someone saying yes, this would want this product effectively.
Yep.
Does that need to be someone within your network as your mind map slide 3 or something, or could it be someone else in industry that says we want this? Does it have to be within the military area?
Yeah.
Or?
So industry support is useful. I guess it's probably less compelling for us than someone who sits within one of the armed forces. Having that evidence is not just a burden on the supplier, but it's something that we try and do collaboratively. So, we used to ask suppliers to turn up with a letter of support. We've now stepped away from that, because if you're an SME who's not working in defence already, that's quite a hard thing to do. And so it's a kind of collaborative thing. So a supplier can come to us and say, well, I've got this thing, I'm not really sure whether it fits. And then we can work together to figure out whether there's the evidence there to justify the effort of a full proposal.
Can I share my experience on that?
Yeah.
Really, I've had mixed experience. I went to a General Dynamics exhibition.
Okay.
I met with several personnel there from DASA, etc. They gave me the idea of an innovation which I've now spent 12 years building.
Okay.
We then went back to DASA to say, we've built this thing that you said you wanted, and they've said, we can't really see how this fits.
Okay.
It's fine because it helps the rest of the world, but it was, that was kind of my main driver, was the fact that the military had said this would be ideal.
Okay.
So
well, we could certainly have a chat about that.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, if it was useful 12 years ago, and obviously I don't know who you spoke to then, but very happy to chat through that.
Yeah,
I think a comment from me would be as well, Henry, that I hope you found other people interested in the application, but presumably when DASA or when the MOD or when the police look at something, if it is sustainable beyond the narrow market, then that's a strength, isn't it? Because it means that company is more likely to be a sustainable supplier to the public sector as well as the private sector.
That was the root of my question about whether that end interest needs to be from within the public, or could it private sector? Yeah.
We had one more hand up, I think. Is that Joshua? Jose?
Yes, absolutely.
Go for it.
Just a quick question. What sort of support do you provide to SMEs, especially and startups like myself, for document management? What I say with this is that in the defense sector, they're very, very picky on what you store the data, how you share your data, are you developing something that is sensitive or not. So understanding that has a cost to set up.
Yep.
I wonder if on the side of the financial support to deliver the project, there is some support from right, you should operate within this system, you should, I don't know if I'm asking the question correctly.
No, I think I understand. So yes, certainly when we fund a project, often that will include, obviously that includes the cost of what the project costs. So the supplier is free to say, if I'm to do this, I need to set up these facilities, I need to set up this system, and that will be part of the cost of the proposal. Okay. I guess it might be a little bit more difficult if the supplier is asking us to fund something that will then have an enduring utility for the supplier beyond that project.
Okay.
In which case we might start to think, well, maybe we should just be paying for a proportion of that rather than all of it. But it's probably worth having a chat in more detail about the specifics of the case.
I'll comment on that one, if I may, briefly as well, because I did quite a lot of work in the nuclear industry, which has a huge amount of its own requirements and its own specifications, systems, procedures, quality control, its own language. And in that project, we were able to fund organizations to get those accreditations and get involved in those systems. It's an understood part of the process that you would have to be able to do that. You could also, perhaps we could talk about this another time. Oxlep's own innovation funding can be used to get accreditations or to adopt systems and procedures, which then leave you in a better position to be able to apply for something like Peter's funding. Well, DASA's funding, not Peter's personally, but so yeah, I think there are ways where those sorts of costs can be included in applications, generally speaking.
Okay. Thank you.
That's great. Okay, shall we move in the interest of time? Thanks both of you for both of those questions, and keep them coming. In the interest of time, Hannah, would you like to give us your contribution?
Absolutely. I will just attempt to share my screen. Are you able to see my presentation? It should be loaded now.
It's up there. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. Nice to see you all this morning. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Peter, for the introduction so far. Before I start, just a reminder, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself or pop it in the chat. I actually can't see the chat or who's got their hands raised at the moment. So if you just want to unmute yourself, that might be easiest as we go through. So just as a bit of background, my experience, my career so far has all been in the city. I worked at the London Stock Exchange for 7 years, and I've always had a focus on supporting early stage private companies in accessing both the knowledge and the funding that they need to grow and achieve their ambitions. And that's also what I'm doing here at DASA. So I'm part of the Access to Mentoring and Finance team, A2MF. It's a relatively new team, as Peter mentioned, and our focus and our time is really dedicated to supporting the business behind the innovation. So before I launch into exactly what we do with companies, I just wanted to spend a moment talking about the growth trajectory of many businesses and the various funding options that sit on that journey. So apologies, the slide is quite hectic. It's very, very busy. But the stuff that Peter has spoken about and the wonderful opportunities available with DASA funding, that's very much focused on supporting, the technology readiness of the business. So on this slide, I'm talking about that x-axis along the bottom. But what we look at in my team is helping to advance the business maturity. So that's seen here on the y-axis on the left-hand side. So the ideal line that business would want to follow is that diagonal straight from the bottom left up to the top right. So you found that business, it's in that early stage, pre-revenue, and you go on this nice journey up towards commercialization and exploitation. The technology, the business, they're maturing together nicely and really supporting one another at the same pace. However, in reality, this often looks really different, and I'm sure this might be resonating with some of you here today, but actually often it looks like a kind of S-shaped curve. So you can see that in purple just overlaid across the top. A lot of the early focus is on accelerating the development of the product or service, and technology maturity is often reached before the business itself is actually kind of ready. So DASA has recognised the importance of this, the importance of building up both sides of the business, and so that's what between us, we've got Peter and that side of things, and then me and my colleagues. And so we're really here to just smooth out that journey up towards the top right corner. And to be honest, I think, you guys are well placed for this. You're attending today's session, you're involved in the LEP. So, I like to think you guys are more on that diagonal than that S shape anyway. So just going into a bit more detail on how we go about doing this at DASA. So in the A2MF team, we work with DASA-funded companies from the perspective of the business as a whole. So we're not just looking at like a specific project or technology. And this links back actually to Henry's question that we just had around, most of the support we do is actually beyond just the defence and security sector. So if your technology is dual use, which to be honest, most that I see are, then we can have conversations about other sectors, and this support goes beyond just those kind of working with the MOD and defence and security sectors in general. So in terms of what we do, we start off by running a diagnostic just to understand your needs and aspirations, and then we have a toolkit of initiatives that we can share to support growth and help you overcome any barriers that we identify. This includes smart brokerage into our extensive business incubation and support communities. Perhaps this is finding someone who can help with value proposition building, finding someone who can advise on intellectual property, R&D tax credits, EAS, SEIS eligibility, that sort of thing. So chances are we have someone in our ecosystem that can help. And this is actually where we collaborate nicely with our friends at OxLEP and also the other LEPs across the country. In terms of the support that we provide, it's broadly done across 3 pillars, and these are the 3 that we think are most critical within this sector. So we have market readiness, and this really is about being ready to commercialize. That might include understanding your clients better, customer persona mapping, or activities such as value proposition building and market analysis. And then the next one is quite specific given the sectors, and this is what we've labelled prime readiness. And this relates really to being ready and well positioned to be part of that defence or security supply chain. And then finally, funder readiness or investment readiness. And this is being ready to go out and seek finance. So in whatever form that might take, whether it's grants or later stage funding. And for example, we help businesses understand the landscape in more detail, demystify the various options available, and then help prepare for whatever route you'd like to take. And then the 4th component on this slide, our alternative funding models, and that is actually where I'd like to dedicate the rest of my session to, as Peter mentioned. So in June this year, we launched our Defence Innovation Loans. These are available to SMEs for later stage R&D. So if we're thinking in terms of TRLs, this would be TRL 6 and above. And they exist to help bridge that funding gap between what is available in terms of earlier stage funding and then more mainstream options. So actually, if I just try jumping back, yes, we go, to this first slide we looked at, you can see the yellow circle that sits kind of towards the bottom left. So this would be your typical DASA funding and other grants that Peter spoke about earlier. But actually what we've recognised is that for some businesses it can be quite challenging to progress on from this type of funding towards angels, venture capital, later stage commercial loans. So this is why we've innovated this new product, our Defence Innovation Loans. So these are suitable for businesses with a clear route to commercial success and where you can evidence that the business is suitable to take on a loan, but there's still some need for public sector support. Quite a lot of info on here, and I'm obviously happy to follow up with anyone afterwards. But just to run you through the basics, loans could be from 250k to 1.6 million, so we're talking about a little bit larger than the initiatives Peter mentioned earlier. We're offering a below market interest rate of 7.4%, and there's no additional fees in that. It's available for up to 7 years, with funds drawn in stages during the first 2 years, and then capital and interest repayments start once commercial sales are secured. So we launched these in partnership with Innovate UK. You might have seen similar initiatives from them in the past, and applications are through the same open call mechanism that Peter mentioned earlier on in the session. The application process plus loads more info and tips can be found on the DASA website. And I think these slides will be circulated afterwards, so I have just popped the link in there in case people can't find it. So that is about all from me, actually. Just to wrap up, there's currently 4 of us in the Access to Mentoring and Finance team covering different parts of the UK. My patch is the Golden Triangle, so I'm biased, but obviously it's the best patch. It's all the exciting and innovative stuff happening here. I cover Oxfordshire all the way over to Cambridge and the East, and then down into London. So probably where most of you guys sit. So I'm happy to have a chat with any of you about these initiatives or anything else, Defence Innovation Loans, whatever it might be. So there is my email address.
Hannah, that's great. Thank you very much. Can I use chairman's privilege and sort of ask a quick question? The innovation loans are relatively new. I just wondered sort of what's the market response been? What's the take up been? Because I'm interested in how people are balancing out different types of growth funding sources. And yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. The response has been really positive from the SME community. It's a space where a number of businesses have found a gap. So, you can't just go to the bank and say, look, we've got this cool tech that we'd love you guys to fund, and they're not going to be able to get that funding elsewhere, but they're ready to kind of graduate on from the earlier stage funding. They're looking for slightly more significant amounts of money, and the nice thing about it is it's really looking towards that commercialization piece, so bringing from the TRL 6 through to TRL 9.
Yeah, because I'd sort of get the impression, whereas the banks and the lending sector have been hammered really and criticised for not lending readily, these mechanisms have been put in place to sort of facilitate that. But I'm also conscious that sometimes a loan on the terms that you've just described it is actually far more attractive than complicating ownership and investment from shareholders, etc., etc. So
yeah, absolutely, and that's what we've tried to just give the option. These sorts of initiatives won't be right for every business, but it's good that people have the options out there. So if you're not looking to lose any control of the business and feel like debt might be the right option, but to be honest, it's something we can have a conversation about. Happy to help businesses if they're not sure what might be the right route for them. And we've got other initiatives launching later in the year. So this is just the first. As Peter said, we're a new team, so this is just the first of different options that we're developing to really help bridge that gap in the funding landscape.
That's great, thank you. I think what this is highlighting for me is that there's a bit of a continuum here. So right from people who just don't know if what they've got is relevant, then there's a team of people that you can talk to, right through to companies that are already doing something relevant and receiving support, but DASA's you're all interested in making sure that's successful. So there's a kind of like journey going on, which is really good, because quite often in the business support world there are gaps, where people fall between those gaps, no fault of their own. We've got a question in from Carl. He's popped it in the chat, so I'll read it out if that's okay. Does it have to be tech? We're a growing partnership with a large defence company as a manufacturing distributor. Could we apply to support our growth for new equipment, software and personnel? You might have to explain that one a little bit, Carl, if you're able to unmute yourself, or can't actually see Carl.
Yeah, morning.
Morning.
Hang on, let me show myself as well, so I'm a real person.
Yay.
Yeah, thank you for letting me ask the question. Yeah, so we're an engineering distributor of manufactured parts, and we're growing a good relationship now with a defence company who are involved with various MOD projects, and we're on the cusp of signing a long-term agreement with them. But we don't design or manufacture technology ourselves. We're not hands-on. We're a sort of project management, account management service. Does that count as, supporting defence to the stage where we might be eligible for funding, or does it have to be inventive?
Sorry, just to clarify, is this specifically for the loans or just in general for DASA? Because
I think generally, but also to support our long-term agreement with this defence company, we are looking at a new facility, new software, new hardware, new people. The potential's large, but obviously we don't want to. We just want to see what our options are, really.
also, I don't know if Peter, if you want to kind of start off with DASA more generally, and then I can talk more about the loans.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. So I think in terms of the non-loan side of DASA, there needs to be some kind of development of technology or advancement in a capability. So I think it's unlikely that we would fund a proposal which was simply buying new equipment, software, personnel, unless there was some kind of innovative step within the proposal around how you're using the equipment or the software, or something that you're doing differently with it. but I think I'm
Okay.
pessimistic.
No, that's fair enough. That's why I asked the question. I mean, the growth would be, it is yes, for an MOD project. So I heard earlier in the presentations about maybe we could be sponsored, if that's the right word, by our partner if there was a long-term agreement.
I was
Because
thinking
it helps
about
them manufacture and their cause.
Yeah, so I guess if they were to come to us and say, we've got this new method of manufacture which could reduce cost or increase capability in some way, and if there was a project around introducing that new capability, and if it was relevant enough to defence and security, then maybe. But yeah, we could have a chat about it,
Okay.
but I think it's unlikely.
All right, Peter, thank you.
Right.
Maybe I can just touch on the innovation loan side of things. So in the name, it kind of does signal towards innovative later stage R&D, but as I also mentioned, is around that commercialization piece. So, what we're looking to do is help support businesses as they go from that later stage R&D to commercialization. So if it's a case of getting initial traction and early sales, then that is possibly something we can support. The only kind of differentiation is it for example, sales and marketing activities are typically considered commercial activities and therefore not part of R&D, so they wouldn't be considered eligible project costs. But it's something that we can chat in more detail offline about the specifics of that, and there's actually quite a lot of information we've got on our website and in our top tips about what is included and what can't be included, and how to kind of think about what you're doing in the terms of later stage R&D.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Yeah, and obviously we can explain a bit more about exactly which projects we're involved in.
Yeah.
Maybe then just might shed a bit of light, a bit clearer.
Carl, the only thing I would add, if I may, is that outside of the really good responses that you've had from Peter and Hannah there are other schemes that you might be able to look at which would support your work in that company, in that other company.
Okay.
But it may be that other company has to be the applicant for the funds. So it would depend on their size and the different schemes and things, and obviously, but I have been involved in quite a number of collaborative projects where you would actually be a supplier, but it's the large company or the large SME, if it qualifies, that makes the funding application and presents the business case, etc. So I think there are ways to do these things, because we all recognise that supply chains are complex and there's lots of parties involved in good innovation. So yeah, happy to talk about that as well.
Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. So what I'd like to do, so we've seen sort of the continuum of support that's available. We've had some good questions there trying to clarify what might work and not work in different situations. And hopefully you've begun to think about some of those funds which may be available, but more importantly, perhaps the help to try and work your way through this. I'd like to call on Mike and Eddie, I think it is, that have actually been through some of this, because we thought it'd be great if you heard from somebody that is hopefully going to say that they benefited. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Let me just click on screen share, and perhaps you can tell me if you can see it. Are we in business? I can see.
Yes, we are.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thanks. Thank you, Peter, for the opportunity to speak this morning. So I'm going to stick to the script you asked me to, which was, talk about the benefits, what our experiences have been of working with DASA, and that includes kind of warts and all, where we think actually, as a tech company trying to develop technology very quickly, where we think some improvements could be. And I think this is a great example of just how early in the cycle of a company that DASA is actually willing to engage, because I'll be very surprised if actually it has heard of Oxford Dynamics. We're a brand new startup based in Oxfordshire at the Harwell campus, co-founded by myself, Eddie, and a colleague, Shefali Sharma, just over a year ago. And the idea is to profile the sort of company that DASA has found interesting, and crucially, the type of technology amongst the many hundreds that DASA is interested in, what has pricked their interest and why we've managed to secure the funding that we have done. So what are we doing? So our aim is to become a leader in AI-enabled technology. And the problem that we're trying to tackle for the MOD, and in fact, further afield, showing the dual-use nature of what we're trying to develop, is to understand and add intelligence to complex data sets. The MOD has a unique challenge in terms of the complexity and breadth of the data it needs to process and understand. And we think we've got a really smart solution that can help with that. And then beyond that, we're interested in applying those technologies and techniques to enhancing situational awareness, with our specific focus actually being on the space environment. So we presented to DASA quite an exciting roadmap of where we want to take the technology ultimately, where we can help solve problems for the MOD, but then show the big commercial vision of where we can apply the technology, if we get it right, of course, right through to terrestrial applications, and then very excitedly what we can do on orbit to protect critical space infrastructure for the UK. So a very quick overview of the company. As I said, co-founded by the three of us. This is actually my fourth technology business, so I've got a bit of form in doing this before. Some of you may have heard of Oxford Space Systems. That's my biggest success to date, space business working on deployable antennas for satellite systems, founded that about 8 years ago. That itself was a great beneficiary of MOD funding, with a huge amount being put into the business by DASA, and I'll actually touch on that in my last slide. Unusually for a startup that's still developing its intellectual property, we're actually cash flow positive. And this has come about by a very fortuitous engagement, actually, with many aspects of MOD. So we're receiving funding from a certain part of the MOD that we're not actually allowed to mention openly, but that also includes grant funding from DASA and DSTL. As I mentioned, we're headquartered at the RAL campus in Oxfordshire. So what exactly are we doing? Well, I'm going to hand over to Eddie now, who's going to give you a quick flavour and overview of the technology. Sorry, Eddie, over to you. You're going to talk about our evolution first, aren't you? Just show how new we are and where we come from.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike, and really nice to meet everyone virtually. So I'm Eddie Jackson. I'm also one of the co-founders at Oxford Dynamics. So just going to build a bit on kind of what Mike was saying. So talking about how have we got to where we are today. So we actually were founded in January 2020. After that, we secured 2 MOD contracts. We started then maturing our kind of technology to about TRL 3. It was kind of in March 2021 that we actually secured DASA funding to develop some novel AI technology, which I'm going to cover a little bit in the next slide. After this, we went on to secure a significant contract with the MOD again, and then another significant contract with the DSTL. If Mike, you could go on the next slide, please. Great. So as Mike kind of mentioned, I'm just going to talk very high level about one of the pieces of AI-based technologies from our portfolio. So we're actually developing quite a large portfolio of AI-based technologies for several different applications. I'm going to kind of highlight the usefulness of this using the example of autonomous cars. So, talking about the problem before actually talking about the solution. So what is the problem with autonomous cars? Why don't we have autonomous cars now? Why can't you flag your autonomous taxi down and it collects you? Well, one of the main problems is actually at the very beginning of when you start thinking about developing that autonomous capability. So it's actually in the choice of sensor. So you can see on the slide, there are lots of sensors that you can choose from, but they all have their kind of trade-offs. So say you select a visible camera to create your autonomous vehicle. Well, visible is very, very rich. It's a very rich image using quite high resolution, but it's very kind of susceptible to things like glare. So say you have a kind of very glary image, you can kind of see one on the side of a car's headlights. That'll straight away kind of make your autonomous algorithms kind of error prone, and your car could possibly crash or hurt someone. So it's not great just using visible sensors. Well, is it great just using thermal? Thermal usually is quite low resolution. They're still susceptible to things like kind of very low thermal signatures in the environment. And the low resolution isn't going to help you when you're trying to localize. So again, error prone and not perfect. So the kind of obvious solution here is, why don't we take them all? Why don't we use all of the sensors? And it's been kind of the last 20 years that people have been trying to do this. So use a number of sensors together. But it's only in the past 2 years that, with the introduction of kind of innovative AI, that it's actually becoming quite possible to do that and to produce these kind of robust AI-based systems for applications like autonomous vehicles. So where we're concentrating on is building that novel, robust AI fusion capability. And I've kind of outlined it here with the application of autonomous cars, but obviously it has lots of other applications, but I'm not going to talk about too many today. But yeah, so we're essentially developing a portfolio of AI technology for complex data problems. I'm just going to pass back over to Mike to kind of talk about how our interactions with DASA have helped us do that. So back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Eddie. So there's a very quick whistle-stop tour flavor of the sorts of things we're working on. And the last image that's hopefully appeared on people's screens, you can see the previous image. We lost the resolution due to the glare of the headlights, but with Fusion, we can actually pull apart that image a little bit better and understand, there's actually people standing next to that vehicle. And I talked when I opened about taking technology to orbit for space domain awareness. You can hopefully appreciate we have some big challenges on orbit with glare, dark shadows, etc. So it's about merging a range of sensors to really understand what's going on orbit around some of our critical satellite infrastructure. Okay, so working with DASA, in fact, Peter, you did a really good job earlier of kind of nailing the headlines with working with DASA. So some of this will be a little bit of a repeat. But one thing that wasn't highlighted was we found actually applying for DASA funding to be a relatively low application overhead, and it's certainly much less intensive and time demanding than, say, applying for money from the European Space Agency or indeed even some of Innovate UK's grants. And I think this is really critically important because we all know as startups and SMEs, time is money and it's opportunity cost. If we're spending weeks writing long bids and applications, that's time we're not actually spent developing our technology. So DASA, I think, has done a great job at streamlining this process as much as they can. It only seems to be the bare critical information they require rather than a long thesis on how you're going to make money in 20 years' time from this. As Peter said, 100% funded, which is fantastic for a startup. It means we haven't got to scrabble around trying to find co-funding. It means we don't have to approach the investment community so early in our growth cycle that we get excessively diluted. So absolute godsend in terms of protecting equity. And when you're actually underway with the project, we found the actual ongoing project reporting to our monitoring officer to be really pragmatic and sensible. In fact, compared to all my experience working with ESA, UK Space Agency, Innovate UK, and other funding bodies, I would say working with DASA is probably the lightest touch that I've seen in terms of project reporting. Great thing about it is retention of IP. Some funding bodies require access to the IP, even though you own it. They want a free license to that IP. As Peter said earlier, none of that is put on the table with DASA. You retain complete ownership of the IP. No need to get into tedious licensing agreements either. And crucially, an access to an exploitation manager. And we think this is a fantastic idea. It's not just about funding R&D for the sake of funding R&D. Even if you presented a strong commercial case, you can still be scratching your head thinking, am I actually going to exploit this in the right way? Am I talking to everybody I could be in the end user community? Our exploitation manager has been fantastically proactive, making great introductions across the wide range of the MOD empire, from the Navy to the Air Force to the Army, to understand how we could make sure we're developing this technology for the end user community. And we haven't seen that in other forms of funding. So DASA have absolutely nailed that in our mind. And as Peter touched on earlier, you don't just go in blind and cold with a grant application or a bid application and just hope for the best. It's all about engaging with end users before you actually formally apply. So you get a really good understanding whether this is going to resonate well and be adopted ultimately by the end user community. And you know what, if you don't get a strong feedback, then that gives you a chance to pivot and change direction. So we think that's a great idea as well. It kind of gives you the warm and fuzzy that it's worth applying for, because you know it's going to find resonance with the assessment committee. Where things we think could be improved, and this applies, I think, to any funding body in the UK. There's nothing more impatient than an entrepreneur that wants to get on with the technology. So anything that can be done to compress the assessment time, the assessment process is obviously a great advantage. The grants are relatively small, and that's probably reflected in why the process can be very low in terms of bureaucracy, but it would be nice to see opportunities occasionally for much larger grants, because not everything can be developed, for less than 150k. And then have a follow-on roadmap for opportunities. Where can this grant lead? We've seen with other funding bodies, this is a phase 1 application, but this is what phase 2 might look like if you're successful. So I think that would be great if DASA could enhance its offering in that way. And one thing that we have found on our current project, when we have been successfully engaging with the end user community, it's been a mismatch in time frame and time understanding. Most people will know, if you're a VC funded startup, you form the business, grow the team, develop your IP, and your VC is looking to make an exit in 7 to 10 years. We had a recent conversation with one potential end user, and we said, when do you think you would fully commercially deploy this? And they said, maybe 7 to 10 years time. So you can see we need to kind of align these worlds a little bit more where the SME is and where the end user community can be. And then my final slide, just showing what can happen. And this is an experience in my previous business, Oxford Space Systems. We applied to DASA for funding. They actually called me up and said, there's good news and bad news. The bad news is we're not going to fund the 200k grant you applied for. And you could probably see on screen what actually happened. And it shows what comes back to Peter's point. The agency doesn't live in isolation. It talks to DSTL. It talks to the wider aspect of the MOD. Oxford Space Systems proposed a technology that I think was right place, right time, and they actually came back and allocated £1 million worth of funding to develop the technology. And that story was picked up by BBC News. So it does go to show, if you do have that killer technology, it doesn't really matter where you are in the stage of your growth. Money can be found in exceptional cases to really turbocharge your business. So I'm sure I've trespassed well over my time. So thank you for listening. And of course, we're more than happy to answer your questions as well. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Eddie. I don't think you've trespassed too much, if at all. Actually, quick question from me, are you now the kind of technology that Eddie talked about? I mean, I could see application in so many different sort of sectors and environments for that. Is that going on now as well? Yeah,
so we're actually looking at, Mike kind of covered it a bit, creating technology that's very dual use. So I've kind of outlined one scenario there, so the autonomous car scenario, but you can see, exactly like you outlined, this kind of technology, understanding different modalities of data can be kind of, dual use for the NHS, and you can list a lot of other commercial applications it can be applied to. So yeah, it is kind of brilliant. Very, very concentrating on dual use.
I think Mike is also a fantastic example, who's somebody who has immersed themselves in the world of organizations, if you like, and has benefited from it now on a number of different occasions. Because one of my messages to people is, if you are looking for innovation funding, it's kind of like get in there and get wet, get dirty, whatever that metaphor is. You have to sort of learn about these organizations and the networks over a little period of time, and eventually it starts to sort of pay off. I mean, is that fair, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When people approach me and say, I'm thinking about applying for some funding, I'm just going to push in a bid. And I said, look, never, ever just send a bid in cold. Go and talk to that agency. Find out what their metrics for success are. Find out how they're being judged. What's their criteria from central government? Because we're all judged by somebody. We all have a boss ultimately. So find out what specifically that agency is looking for and why they're looking for it. What is the time frame? And you're absolutely right. I say kind of wear out the shoe leather. You've got to go to plenty of networking events, go and meet the people. We spend a lot of time building the relationship with DASA, to the point now we can just pick up the phone call, have an informal chat about an idea, and then if it looks like it's going to go somewhere, have a deeper conversation. So spend a lot of time building that relationship with Innovate UK, DASA, DSTL, and the European Space Agency.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. That's brilliant. So what I'd like to do is just quickly check, is there anybody, kind of raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have a quick question, or any question, it doesn't have to be quick, for Eddie or Mike, specifically on their experience through Oxford Dynamics. If there isn't anything, what I would like to do is get you to start to think about general questions that you'd like to raise, because we will, in the time that we've remaining, I'd like to devote most of it to open Q&A. Have a couple of questions of my own that I might kick us off with. But unfortunately for you, I do have a couple of slides that I'd like to share myself. What I'm going to do, though, is just show you what those slides are rather than run through them, because you will get these slides afterwards, and then you can approach me for questions or anything after. So can I just check, can you see that I'm sharing with you? Yep, excellent. Okay, so you see where we are on the agenda, and I want to move to the open forum as soon as we can. A few quick things from me. I was going to talk about the nature of innovation funding more generally, but I think this has been covered very adequately by Peter. Innovation grants tend to have different types of focus. Some of them are around challenges, some of them are open. Through the innovation advisory work at Oxlet, we can sort of guide you through what's applicable, but you do have to look in over a fairly, cast your net fairly wide. A good place to start is the government's own search engine. It's a bit clumsy, but it will lead you in the right direction. Oxlet does have our own Go Create scheme. Unfortunately, it's nothing like DASA's 100% contribution. But what I would say is, if you are beginning to think about developing something which you think might be of interest to the police or security or defence, and you need to do a bit of work on feasibility or something, and you're willing to spend a bit of your own money or your investors' money on that, then we can make a contribution to those costs to put you in a better position to then promote that, if you like, and have that discussion with Peter and his team. So it's a contribution to costs which you can't avoid, and if it's early in the process, that's fine. If it's later in the process, that's fine. I can talk to you at length about Go Create, or there's plenty of information on the web from us. Innovate UK has been mentioned a number of times. I'm not going to run through who they are or what their schemes, but if you're trying to find your way through Innovate UK or the KTN or its other partner organisations, I can help with that. But they are another source of funding which might sort of complement what DASA and indeed Hannah's sort of loan side of things might be able to do. Now, I did a very quick search yesterday. I think I spent 20 minutes just out of curiosity. What could I find in the way of open calls and activity or networks around defence and security, and had no problem beginning to find some opportunities which looked like they were worth exploring. So there is stuff out there, is my message to you, and there are networks that can help you find your way through this stuff if you're not as immersed as Mike is, for example. Don't forget Europe. We're still sort of in it, really, with one foot or something. I think we are still able to apply for significant funding that comes through that route. It's different now, but it's still there. And there is a lot of funding put towards security or addressing challenges such as immigration or people movement, etc., which is security issues. and schemes that can help you get work done as opposed to actually just giving you money. We can talk about those another time, but you'll get this slide to follow some of those. And my last message really is that you have to, if you can, think laterally and creatively about who might be interested in what you're doing. What problems could what you're doing help to solve, and who could you partner or align yourself with to try and find some funding or some partnership resources of a different type. And we can help to some extent with that process, as can Peter and Hannah's teams. This is just something about, you know, where can I find out what other people are doing? That's you know, one of the things that I like to do, just to get a flavour of what's going on, and publications like this are pretty helpful. So next steps before we go to Q&A. Try and frame what you're thinking about in the context of what you heard today. I think you do have to do a bit of homework and say, why would this be of interest to somebody before you pick up the phone or have that initial conversation or send an email, and use what's available either through myself or through other advisors to discuss those ideas and flesh them out before you actually sort of go too far down the line with an application or any kind of process. And there's lots of help available to you, as I think has been highlighted today. There's my contact points. You'll get all this at the end of the session. So what I would encourage you to do is put up your hand, pop a question into the conversation box, or simply unmute yourself. There's a question in the chat about, can I put up the government search website again? I'll send that to you. Yeah, we'll send that to you afterwards so that you can start that process. Don't have too high expectations. It's a bit clunky, but it's a good start point. So has anybody got any questions that they'd like to kick us off with? We've got 15 minutes and then I'm going to have to let our presenters go. Anybody want to leap in? I can't believe that you've had all your questions answered.
Well, as a presenter, can I ask a question, Peter?
Yeah, I guess so.
It's actually a question to Hannah, actually, about loans. How much, you know, how detailed due diligence do you need to go through on the company? I asked that on behalf of Oxford Dynamics. Not that we're hiding anything. It's just a case of, are we too early as a startup to be considered, or do we need to wait a little bit while and build up a bit more of a track record for the assessment guys to go through and give us the nod? Because we're and the reason I'm asking is we're approaching the point and having internal discussions. We're confident about the technology, we're confident about the team, but if we had some additional funding, we know we could accelerate the technology to market and beat overseas competitors. So really, a loan would allow us to buy time to market. But if we're not in the comfort zone of the assessment panel, then we're kind of forced to go down the VC route, which is obviously damn painful from losing your equity.
Totally, that's a really good question, actually, because it's a bit of a balancing act with the defence innovation loans, because we're looking for businesses that have reached a level of technology maturity that they're ready to commercialise. You know, the loan isn't for early stage R&D. That's more where the other initiatives that Peter touched upon are suitable. But at the same time, you can't be such a solid, established business with a wonderful financials that, you know, you need to be able to demonstrate that you need the kind of public sector support through one of our loans, rather than just being able to walk up to your kind of bank and get more traditional debt funding. So it is a balancing act. And actually, a lot of companies that have had earlier stage funding from DASA or Innovate UK are quite suitable for a loan, because, you know, you've used that money to de-risk the technology, you've developed it, you've hit that later stage, and now it's point of commercialization. So that's actually the gap that we're trying to help fill. Obviously, if you were to demonstrate such perfect, wonderful financials and as a really solid business, we might question actually whether you needed it from us, and if you could go to a bank and get it. So it could be that you're in the right place. In terms of actually how the assessment is done, it's done through both Innovate UK and DASA. So we would do our typical assessment around desirability, viability, feasibility on the actual technology side, and then Innovate UK do like the credit assessments and business viability checks.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah, for answering that as well. We've got a couple of questions. I'm going to invite Andrew from Sygentis, so I know he's been around some of these loops before. And then apologies if I get the name wrong. Thiab, if you'd be ready to answer your question in a minute. But Andrew, go first.
Yes, I just wanted to raise the issue of we're dealing with defence-related technologies, and there is a risk of some of the information regarding this being quite confidential, and that potentially gives some real challenges to startup businesses when you end up with a situation where you cannot disclose some of the underlying technology and behind inventions to an extent that it's reaching a total roadblock in terms of looking at commercial exploitation. I wonder if the presenters could comment on that.
Yeah, I'll go first. And yes, I agree. And we've engaged together on this, Andrew, over a long period, and both been frustrated by it, I think. I guess for us, a lot of the stuff that we fund is, especially when you're down at the very immature level, there is usually a way that you can badge the innovation without talking too much about the application, in which case it's that can be a way around it. We tend to not get involved in much very sensitive innovation. We can be a signpost to other parts of MOD and wider government who might be more appropriate for that. But as you've experienced, Andrew, that process is not always slick, and we kind of rely on others to come back to us with the feedback that we need. So it is a challenge. It's one that we recognise. It comes up rarely, but when it does come up, it can be a real annoyance. And I guess I would just say it's worth having an initial face-to-face chat if there are situations where you think that might be an issue, and we can talk about potential ways forward. But there are situations, certainly, as you know, when we come to a dead end.
Okay, thanks.
It's very honest of you, Peter. I sorry, Hannah, you were.
Well, no, I was just gonna add, just from a slightly different perspective, and I don't know, maybe the Oxford Dynamics guys also have a real life experience of this, but one of the things that my team we work on is talking about that to external funders as well, because it's not just about going out and on the business development side, but one of the activities that we support businesses on quite heavily is how you actually position what might be quite sensitive information if you're going out looking for angels or VCs, because there's stuff that you can't really share there as well. So there's a whole host of stuff that we can help with at DASA on that perspective too.
That's a really important point, Hannah, and I think any sensible, decent VC knows you're not going to reveal the crown jewels at a first meeting. They can do the technical due diligence on the team, their background. So for instance, a great example at Oxford Space Systems, we were developing novel materials for space. We're happy to show you the materials, but you don't need to know precisely how we make them in the exact formulation, but we can show you the test results. So we can show you it behaves as we say. We've shown you it working in application, and you've met the team that developed it. We're not telling you exactly how we make it until you're generally serious about investing money in this business. So
totally. And also who you might be selling stuff to. You might be able to say we've got traction, we've sold like a million, we've got a million of revenue, but I can't tell you at this stage exactly where that's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. So, your bank statements, we've shown them, we just redact it. They can see the money coming in, they can see the quantum that we talked about, but we don't have to identify the exact source of that money. Yeah, so there's ways around it. And certainly with Oxford Space Systems, where we were developing very sensitive technology, now seen as strategically important for the defence of the UK, we have in that business a portfolio of external VC investors, including one from the US, and we managed to navigate some very delicate territory to get to success. So I think where there's a will, there's a way. If the investor is genuine and they genuinely like the business, they will understand and you can navigate. So for me, it would be a red flag if you can't actually get that to a successful conclusion.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Mike. And I might try and follow up with you separately later on to try and take some advice there. But
no problems. Yeah, happy to, Andrew.
Thanks.
Yeah, we know each other anyway, don't we? So don't be shy picking up the phone.
I thought it was interesting in Mike's presentation about the advantages of working with DASA, which Peter had talked about in any case, but Mike reinforced, which is that the ownership of IP at the early stage of this discussion is quite pragmatic and recognised by DASA, which isn't always the case. I mean, I do with a lot of innovation that comes from universities, and it becomes a problem before you've even got off the starting block. So I
was going to invite Eddie to make a comment on university, because a lot of the IP that underpins what we're working on, we had to be very careful. Eddie can dive in here. We're building on his PhD research and therefore being very carefully, clearly defining what was developed at university and what we're generally doing that's new, that's arising IP. But I still think it's a major, major barrier to unlocking the genuine potential of universities. They just have such archaic approaches to intellectual property. I won't get on my soapbox on this call, but I think universities should stick to doing what they do best, which is come up with the ideas and then work out much more pragmatically how they can unlock that IP and put it in the hands of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, another session indeed. I better move on to Thiab. You've been waiting very patiently. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the great information today. I just had a question around, you mentioned that we could have our product or invention looked at by OxLab to give the opinions of where to direct our approach, maybe for uses. I was quite interested in knowing a bit more how I could take advantage of that.
Yeah, well, that's an easy one for me, actually, Thiab. So basically, if you get in touch with me after this session, and my contact details are all over the place, if only on the slides, that you'll get these afterwards.
Okay.
We can have an initial chat about what you're doing, where you might start looking, what the help is that you need at this particular point, and what funds we've got or otherwise to help with that process. So me is the answer to start with, at least.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd look forward to speaking to you then about that.
Yep, excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that goes for anybody else as well. If you're not really sure you want to, bother Peter or Hannah at the moment, have a chat with me first, and we'll work it up a little bit to make that process a little bit more easy. Could I invite Mark to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi there, and look, thanks. It's been a great presentation and a terrific use of taxpayers' money. So well done. Very briefly, we've been trading for 9 years, and we were probably a little bit too early in the market for our solution. But the market's now ready for what we do, and we will need the loan to build a new technology platform, which will then allow us to rapidly scale. We're completely comfortable with that. The question is, we've found that we've just created a community interest company, because we're about creating security through community. Could we put the loan into a community interest company, or does it have to be a private limited company, or are you pretty agnostic? It's just as long as the money's put to good use, you don't really care where it goes.
Oh, that is a good question. I don't know. No one's asked me that question before. It's something I can check though. You've got my Do you want to drop me a note afterwards and I can?
I've actually taken a
send you-
screen grab of your
Okay, cool.
details. So yeah, no, we'd be delighted to show you what we're doing. It's good for the UK government. It's good for security. So yeah, that'd be cool. And then we can work it through. We're happy to put it into the community interest company, because that actually just underpins the kind of methodology and the ethics of the project.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it'd be
Mark,
great to follow up and find out more about what you guys are doing, and then we can chat
Thanks.
with the loan.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mark, I've got a little bit of knowledge about CICs and social enterprises and things, but I mean, it's interesting that you're going that route, because it can open up funding opportunities by itself, just being that type of organization. So might be worth having a chat as well about local networks and people locally, if you're not already engaged with them, that can help with those kind of relatively novel company structures. I think the current terminology is purpose-driven organisation, isn't it? It changes periodically, but there is sort of funding that seems to be aimed at purpose-driven organisations, which other Oxlet clients have managed to tap into. And support as well through the various networks and things. So let's have a chat.
No, that's fantastic. No, we've literally just done it this week. So yeah, that'd be great.
Cool.
Keen to learn. Thank you very much.
Have you kept both structures, by the way? Have you got
Absolutely. Some of the businesses actually can stay in the profit side. It's just that to really work with the International Maritime Organization and lots of other organizations, especially the military, it's easier if you're a not-for-profit. We're a private limited company. People get a bit sniffy about it, to be blunt.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it, at the moment? And I think it goes for the investment side of things as well. There are some organisations and funds which are purely now looking at purpose-driven organisations, and you kind of have to have those credentials to get that kind of private sector investment, let alone public sector investment, which is showing how the market's changing generally. Look, everybody, it's 12:30. I don't think there are any more hands raised. If there is anybody that has a burning issue, then quickly unmute yourself.
I was going to say, just very briefly, once we understand if this CIC model works for you guys, I kind of wish we'd done it 9 years ago, because it just makes it so much easier with investors. They go, oh, you've got a community interest company, it's clear, the process is there. I wish we'd done it 9 years ago, and it's actually not that expensive to create. So you've got your for profit over here, and then for other business you're over here, and actually it's really working for us, put bluntly.
That's great to hear, and there's more and more case studies or case examples of people that have made it work for them now, which I think is great. Okay, look, it's gone 12:30. I want to conclude by thanking our presenters for their valuable time, expertise, knowledge, pro bono support, offers to speak to people after the event as well. So thank you very much for that. Peter and Hannah, and particularly Mike and colleagues, because people giving their experience of these organizations and networks is particularly valuable, and you don't have a lot to gain from it. Thank you for that. I would also like to thank everybody for attending. We managed to hang on to almost everybody, which is great, because when an event like this is promoted, we don't quite know who it's going to be of interest to. So hopefully Hannah and Peter will get some useful leads from this, and those people that want to approach me first or in parallel, I look forward to speaking to you again. So we'll follow up with probably a questionnaire about how you found the event, and you will receive the slides if I get Hannah and Peter's permission to distribute those.
Yep.
And yeah, let's continue the conversation, and I look forward to seeing you at our next innovation briefing, and hopefully at a physical in-person event later on in the year. So thanks very much.